Welcome everyone to MLB The Show 24 and my newest franchise with the St. Louis Cardinals. After spending the last year rebuilding the Oakland Athletics and having an amazing time in that franchise, I'm back for another challenge, and I've picked a very different kind of team for this year. The Cardinals are not one of the worst teams in baseball. They are firmly a solid playoff contender, but they're coming off a really bad season, finishing in 5th place, last in the NL Central, a division that's gotten stronger. And you could really see any of the 5 teams in there winning the division going forward. The Reds have gotten much stronger in a short amount of time. The Brewers have a really strong farm system and have made the playoffs 5 out of the last 6 years. I feel like the other 4 teams in this division are all getting stronger, and while the Cardinals can still compete, this is an aging roster that they made even older this offseason, and I don't think this is a core that's going to compete for a World Series. I think it's going to be tough enough for them to just compete within this division, considering the youth on other teams that should continue to get better, while the Cardinals are far more reliant on veterans across the roster. There are a few young players that we're going to talk about, but if this team is to be successful in the short term, they're going to need a variety of players to still play at the top of their game despite their age. I think that makes for an extremely fragile team, and I don't think it's very sustainable. But that just makes me even more excited to have the Cardinals as my team for this year. They're a franchise that has outstanding history, 11 World Series championships, and of course some of the greatest legends in baseball history, from Ozzie Smith to Bob Gibson, Stan Musial, Lou Brock and Albert Pujols, and many others. It's always a bonus in franchise to have uniforms from all these past eras, and the Cardinals have some great options for us to use in this series. And I'm somewhat familiar after spending time with this team in the Sidney Jean-Charles Road to the Show a couple years ago. This is a very historic, successful franchise, but in the modern era, they've struggled to regain that championship standard. They did win the World Series back in 2011, appeared again in 2013. Since then, they've only won 2 playoff series. And each of those 2 seasons ended with lopsided championship series finishes. Asking a team like this that's getting older to finally get over that hump after all these years, I think is a lot to ask for, and I don't think it often happens. I want to get this franchise back to competing for a World Series, and I'm excited to get this rebuild underway. Before I break down the team and talk about where we're starting here in 2024, if you wouldn't mind, please leaving a like on the video. That would be much appreciated. It's very helpful to the channel and the series. And subscribe to the channel if you want to be a part of the St. Louis Cardinals franchise and follow the journey. If you want to know what my content is like, my Oakland Athletics franchise will give you a taste of what I expect to do here in this series. So as I've talked about, this is a pretty old roster. The top-rated player is 36-year-old first baseman Paul Goldschmidt, who has been with the Cardinals since 2019. He's had a lot of great years. And I love now in the show they've added this awards page so you can keep track of all the accolades your players are accruing. Now, Goldie is coming off a year where his production dipped pretty significantly. And when it comes to the show, players tend to regress pretty steep after 10 years of Major League service. So I'm expecting, as soon as we get started, Goldschmidt is likely going to be regressing unless they've tuned that specifically in this game. But he still did decline a lot from 2022 to 2023. His power has gone down significantly. The days of him competing for the NL batting title are likely behind him, and he just regressed in a lot of areas. This is also set to be the final year of his contract currently with the Cards. So right off the bat, Here's a player that could be a trade candidate, especially if year one is not looking successful. Now, in the offseason, the Cardinals did want to bolster their team, and they brought in a player who was a Cy Young contender in the American League last year. Sonny Gray had a fantastic season in Minnesota. I myself am a Twins fan, so I saw the last 2 years his dominant play, and he could very well still be a high-level pitcher for the Cardinals. But he's 34 years old. He's reached that 10-year cliff, and now has a 3-year deal where the Cardinals expect him to be their ace. Can he pitch like he did in Minnesota? I'm expecting at least some regression, especially when last year was so much better than his prior seasons. I don't think that his home run rate is anywhere close to sustainable. I'm expecting him to at least be closer to what he was for the previous 4 years. But when you have older players like this, regression can often hit a lot harder than you expect. And when there are so many players above 30 with 10 plus years of major league experience, can you really count on all those guys playing at the top of their game? Because I'm expecting at least a couple to significantly decline. We'll come back to the overall roster in a moment, but this is one thing that really shocked me early on with this team. You've got Sonny Gray, Kyle Gibson, Steven Matz, Miles Michaelis, and Lance Lynn in the starting rotation. Steven Matz is the youngest starting pitcher at 32 years old, 8 years of major league experience. 3 of the 5 starting pitchers have at least 10 years experience. And sure, they've had some good years recently. Kyle Gibson, I know, had a little bit of a resurgence after his time in Minnesota and pitched really well, getting traded here or there, and he's going to be on a new team, it seems, every season. He's on a 1-year deal. Lance Lynn, I mean, he had a lot of good years with the Cardinals, 7 years ago. And it's been a long time since then, and his stint last year with the Dodgers and White Sox did not go all that well. Miles Michaelis, 7 years experience. He is the least experienced starter in the rotation currently. But even at his best, he is not going to rack up a lot of strikeouts or really pitch like a top of the rotation caliber guy. When I look at this team and don't really consider them to be a World Series contender, I really don't like the shape of the starting rotation. It might be fine in April, May, but over the course of the year, most of these guys are probably going to be regressing, and you're wondering about who the next pitchers coming up will be. We'll talk about some of the prospects shortly, but let's get to the rest of this roster. Got Ryan Helsley as the closer at 29 years old. Last year, he saved 14 games, blew 5, but the last couple of years, he's put up really good numbers and now is going to get the chance to be this team's full-time closer. He has a really high K rate, above 12, 13 back in 2022, and that's the modern archetype for today's relievers. So I'm pretty happy having him here. 2 years of team control. Then you've got at third base, Nolan Arenado at 32 years old, now entering his 4th year in St. Louis, almost at Arizona, because I still get tripped up between Arizona Cardinals, St. Louis Cardinals. He, like Goldschmidt, did see some offensive decline last year, and both those guys' power has really fallen off, looking at the isolated power, which is measuring just all your extra base hits, essentially. I don't think these guys are done being high-quality starters, but I'm looking around at other teams that can easily compete for a championship. I mean, the Snakes in Arizona last year, and their deep run all the way to the World Series, and you've got the Braves. We're just not on that level here in St. Louis. Not to mention the Dodgers, always a problem, and added Shohei Ohtani and Yoshinobu Yamamoto in the offseason. Another key veteran is Wilson Contreras behind the dish, replacing Yadier Molina as of last season. Hopefully his regression isn't too steep. He has a 5-year contract still. And he's a great hitter in addition to being a great fielder. Having that dual threat catcher is always a nice bonus. Now, I'm focusing so much on the age of this team. Not everybody is playing out their final years of their career. You do have some solid contributors, but I wonder about the ceiling of some of these guys. Tommy Edman can play just about anywhere, and I think he's going to be a really nice player to have. Maybe not a high upper tier player, but you got to have a guy that can play a lot of positions and do a lot of things well, which he does. I like their outfield quite a bit. That was a big draw because I've always, outfielders have routinely been my favorite players. Grew up a Twins fan. Torrey Hunter was my favorite player as a kid. Then Carlos Gomez down the road when he was their center fielder. Here we got Edman and Lars Nootbaar, 26 years old, one of the youngest players, I think, on this team. He is someone I think we can continue to develop and have as a core part of this roster. Nolan Gorman at second base, the 23-year-old who really broke out last year with his 27 home runs. Second base isn't always a position where you get this level of offense, so there's clearly an advantage here having someone like Gorman continuing to develop here with the Cardinals. Brendan Donovan at second base is 27 years old, a 77 overall, who can also play a lot of different positions. He's a good lefty bat, can play some good defense as well. What I think the Cardinals were banking on was that the young players they'd call up would make up for the regressing age of the core of their roster. And Jordan Walker was one of the top prospects in baseball when he debuted last year with the St. Louis Cardinals. He got off to a pretty hot start, cooled off, went down to AAA, and then came back up and played 117 games at the Bigs last year. And he was an above average hitter in terms of average, on base, and slugging. However, he was one of the worst rated fielders in all of baseball, and his ratings really reflect that. Right now, he really is more of a DH. However, his bat is good enough to keep him at the Bigs, and he's still only 21 years old, so you think down the road he can eventually figure it out and find a home somewhere at a position permanently. But with his starting point, it might end up being something like first base. Now, those of you from my A's franchise will know we have some familiar faces on this team. Dylan Carlson was a bit of an icon in that franchise as a free agent addition that was mediocre in the regular season. But when October came around, this guy turned into a clutch superstar. Dylan Carlson is here again with us in the Cardinals franchise. Now, he's really more of a lefty specialist and has not been a consistent hitter in his time at the Bigs. I think that at 25 years old, maybe you can still develop him further, become a better everyday player, but right now he's a little more specialized. And he's not quite the fielder he was in that series I did last year. Brandon Crawford, Matt Carpenter, a couple more veterans fill out this team. And then you start to get into some of the better prospects they have. Who are some young players we can develop? Mason Wynn made their team out of spring training this year, and he was rated their top prospect. And at the time, they had him as the 43rd best prospect in baseball. And it looks like in the past couple weeks, those rankings have been reshuffled as certain guys like Wynn are no longer considered prospects. But Mason Wynn, a potential 70 overall, he's only 22 years old. This guy has a rocket for an arm at short. His defense looks to be a great strength early on. It's the bat that needs time to come around. He did get some brief experience last year, 37 games, where his offense wasn't quite ready then, but it's something that he can eventually, you hope, grow into while playing good defense at a critical position. Given their listed starting shortstop here is Brandon Crawford, who is 37 years old, I don't see any reason to play him over Mason Wynn. Ivan Herrera is the backup catcher at 23 years old, and that is the bulk of this major league roster. Here's a quick look at the bullpen with Jojo Romero, Giovanni Gallegos, John King, Zach Thompson, Andrew Kittredge, Ryan Fernandez looks like a Rule 5 pickup, and Matthew Liberatore. Overall, we're looking at a team that is ranked number 12 right now, which is kind of a borderline playoff team. Given the team that we have right now, here's what MLB The Show thinks for the future. We see a completely different rotation by 2027. If we dial it back a little bit, you still got Sonny Gray there on his deal. You expect Jordan Walker, Mason Wynn, Lars Nootbaar to continue getting better. Nolan Gorman can probably still improve as well. But the farm system here with the Cardinals definitely needs a lot of work. And I'm seeing one more player here that when I actually start the franchise and playing games, I need to make sure is on the big league roster. Whatever I have here is probably a little bit outdated. This is not going to be my true franchise file. I want to make sure I have the best roster file that I have and the most accurate one. But one more player that should be on that big league roster is Victor Scott II. I've always loved playing with players like this in the show with amazing speed, a lot of defensive ability. Can the offense get somewhere, though? He doesn't project to have much power, but if he can be a high on base stealing threat that plays good defense, that's an archetype of player I've always really liked watching. Victor Scott right now is ranked the Cardinals' 4th prospect and 96 in all of baseball. I mentioned earlier that Mason Wynn was their best prospect. Now with him in the majors, it is starting pitcher, thankfully, a position of need, looking at young players, Tink Hence at 65 overall and 21 years old. And I'm thinking we're going to want him at the majors sooner than later, but don't want to rush him along too quickly as to hurt his development. But one thing to keep in mind is this year in the show, there are PPI incentives. This is the prospect promotion incentive that was introduced recently in Major League Baseball that rewards teams that bring up their top prospects and they accrue a full Major League season, which I think requires like 171 or 172 days at the bigs, and if they achieve some sort of postseason accolade. And I'm not sure what all is eligible, if a Gold Glove is enough or Silver Slugger. Gunnar Henderson and Corbin Carroll earned their teams extra draft picks last year through this program. And when Julio Rodriguez won Rookie of the Year with the Mariners, that gave Seattle the 29th pick in the following draft. So I don't know exactly how all of this works right now, but the players that we have as eligible for this prospect promotion incentive include Mason Wynn, Tekoa Roby, and Tink Hence. Mason Wynn's already at the majors, and maybe could he earn a Gold Glove at short? I don't know about that in year one. And I don't think his offense is going to win him any hardware there. Tekoa Roby, he is a C potential starting pitcher at 64 overall. Probably not someone I'd try to call up too quickly. Tink Hence I'd bring up if he got off to a hot start and could, reliably pitch at the major league level, but I think it's a lot to ask of a 65 overall. Sorting just by potential, I've gone over everybody that has a potential. You're looking at Walker, Gorman, and Wynn as your best young developmental players that could be the future of the franchise. Young players with B potential, we have Matthew Liberatore also at the bigs, Dylan Carlson, Gordon Graceffo, a starting pitcher, Alec Burleson at 62, that's a little bit low at 25 years old, but I think he should be on their big league roster. I just saw him run down a fly ball like the other day, so I will make sure we have like the correct 40-man and 26-man roster once we get started. You also have Lars Nootbaar, Donovan at 27, that's iffy to still get development, Victor Scott, Tink Hence, Adam Kloffenstein, a reliever at 53 overall. I don't think it's the strongest starting point when you think about where this team could be a couple years from now. I see there being a lot of rebuilding with this team, and I also think that A few years from now, it's going to just be such a different team by default. When you look at expiring contracts and older players no longer being starting caliber, we're going to be forced, win or lose early in this franchise, to make considerable changes. The team in year 4 probably will not resemble the team we have here on day 1. Now, the Cardinals are willing to spend some money, and they've done that with guys like Sonny Gray, Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado. Early in this franchise, I don't see me spending all of our budget, because my focus is going to be on building a core that I think can actually compete for a title, and I'm going to be patient until I think we're at that point. I don't want to spend money at places where it's not really going to help us out long term. I'll probably be pretty picky early on in free agency, only finding those players that I think can really help us for multiple years. Or maybe reclamation projects who could turn into trade value. But I'm really excited to get started here with this team. I really enjoyed playing the show from start to finish last year with the Oakland Athletics. It was the first franchise on this channel on MLB The Show, and I learned a lot doing it. I made over 100 videos. I played like 7 full years really focused, and then we did our long-term sim, and I felt like it was a really complete experience. There are some changes I want to make in this series now. Looking back at the A's franchise, to me the highlight was playing with the stars that we drafted and developed, the players that made our eventual championship caliber team what it was. And then I realized, okay, we didn't even start playing with those players in the big leagues until we were on to episode like 33 and 34. And even by the end, we had only spent time with a handful of the prospects that I drafted, the top picks that could make the fast track to the bigs. In this series, I want to experiment more with the pacing early on, knowing that what is really fun about these franchises isn't necessarily those first couple years, but it's when you bring in the talent that is going to develop and become the face of your team. I felt like I even learned a lot doing the final episodes in that A's franchise, and one of them I pretty much covered an entire season in depth, and then I did my long-term sim, basically going over the next 10 plus years. And while I'm not about to simulate the entire full first season, I think there are ways I can structure episodes to give me a chance to cover a lot of ground and tell the story of this team without it taking a considerable number of episodes. Now, if you're not familiar with my style of content here, I am a simulation style player. I like my games to be on the more realistic side. I play on Hall of Fame difficulty, really enjoy that difficulty, and I don't think I've set up all my stuff in here quite yet, but I will not be using like a pitch meter or the pinpoint pitching. It is going to be classic pitching. You just pick your pitch, you aim at a spot, and the pitcher's ratings determine what is going to happen. With the batting, there is no PCI. I'm just going to be hitting X or square or circle, and the player ratings can take over from there. In this series, I will indeed be using that new critical situation tool they have in here, the custom game entry. I'll have to figure out exactly how all this works, but it could be a really fun way to make sure you get some of the action while moving at a fast pace. And then I also play full games, the regular way. We'll do some player lock games and what I'm now calling idle games, where I will just set up my game to play CPU versus CPU, and I'm going to grab that gameplay and use the highlights to do whatever I need with it. There's a lot of ways to tackle the season. It's 162 games, so I always get creative in how I go through my seasons, because sometimes a certain style of game just fits better. I do my best in my series to not take advantage of the CPU in trades, and I try to make them work for both sides of the transaction. And the videos often end up being between 40 and 60 minutes, and sometimes over an hour. If you like long-form style franchise content, this is the place to be. I'm not really good at being brief and making short videos. I'm trying to make my videos a little bit shorter and improve my storytelling and everything that goes into my entire process, but it seems my videos only get longer with time. In real life, we are about a week into the Major League season, and when we get started, we will open with opening day at the LA Dodgers, getting a taste of what it's like to face one of the best teams in all of baseball. Before we get there, I want to make sure I have the optimal roster, and if there's one you'd recommend, let me know. I've been looking at the live rosters that are still missing some of the new players that should be there, like Shota Imanaga from the Cubs or Jung-Hoo Lee from the Giants. So things are not perfectly complete, and then I have to get the 26 and 40 mans right. And I even want to go and look at the injured lists, and you can go if you have your injury settings set to manual, and I'll show you how to do that here if you're not familiar. But I can go ahead and put Sonny Gray, on the injured list and give him something that matches the couple of weeks he's expected to miss to start the year. And I will do that for all the injured players, at least on the Cardinals, and then some of the other ones that are more major across baseball. As even with the injuries turned on, the more minor ones are not in the game. Like German Marquez coming back from Tommy John is in the game. But bumps and bruises, 10-day IL stints, a lot of those are just missing, and I'll try to add those looking at teams' actual injured lists. I hope that serves as a good introduction to what we've got here with the St. Louis Cardinals. It is certainly a good team, and we could win the division here in Season 1, and I wouldn't be shocked. If we finish in 5th place again, I also would not be shocked. I feel like the other teams in this division have perhaps a bit more promising young talent. Although maybe I'm not giving enough credit to Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman, two guys that could be really high-quality contributors for them this year. But I do think that this is a team that is going to be forced to change a lot in the coming years. There are some great players here, a lot of players that are past their prime and are not going to give you that same level of play any longer. And it's hard to predict what exactly is going to happen for these individual players. This is kind of a similar starting point to where I was in my New Orleans Saints franchise over on my main channel. A team that's mid-tier, maybe a playoff team, but a few years from now, it ain't going to be that same team regardless of what they do here right away. So I will leave you all on that note, and I'll be back again later this week as we go through opening day and the first chapter of the St. Louis Cardinals franchise. I'd also like to add that I'm not planning on doing this series for a calendar year, but who knows what's going to happen. I want to do more football on the channel this year. We have a college football game that's kind of an unknown with it not existing for the last 10 years and now suddenly coming back. But I know that I love playing MLB The Show. A lot of people on here will play games and tell you they hate them. I do not hate the show at all. I adore this game. It is a game that feels like it was made for me when you're talking about the offline franchise experience. Now, franchise mode could be much better. I still think it's somewhat shallow in terms of features and some of the depth and some of the things like player progression and regression, but on the field, I just don't think you can beat the show. And even though I have plans this year with other series and upcoming games, I'm going to be playing the show. There ain't no way I'm not playing. Again, if you wouldn't mind leaving a like, I'd very much appreciate that. Subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you all for watching. I'd love to see your feedback in the comments as we get started with our latest franchise journey. Y'all take care, and I'll see you again next time.